next tomorrow. It might be a different one but for this moment, it's this combination really spoke to me this morning. So the poem itself is called In Those Years. It's by Adrienne Rich. So she begins. In those years, people will say we lost track of the meaning of we, of you. We found ourselves reduced to I, and the whole thing became silly, ironic, terrible. We were trying to live a personal life, and yes, that was the only life we could bear witness to. But the great dark birds of history screamed and plunged into our personal weather. They were headed somewhere else, but their beaks and pinions drove along the shore through the rags of fog where we stood, saying I. And Peter Karoff, who at the time the book was written was the founder and chairman of the Philanthropic Initiative. Mm-hmm. This is the essay that he wrote to go along with Adrienne Rich's poem.
Okay, great.
Where does the moral conscience of a community lie if it does not first lie within each of us? As Adrienne Rich makes dramatically clear, it is imperative that we become engaged in community. To be a sleepwalker and live only a personal life is simply not permitted. The pull for me began with the tragic deaths of John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and Robert Kennedy. I was among the millions of Americans who were shaken and moved by those events and the troubling issues they raised. Those issues, then and now, are about equity, social justice, and race, but even more they're about the responsibility of the individual to stand up and be counted. In the early 60s, I became deeply involved in a small but serious community development effort in Roxbury, Boston's Black community. The effort failed for many reasons, but mostly because my well-meaning colleagues and I, all of us white, were rightly perceived as condescending and arrogant. It led to a memorable night when the vice president of the local NAACP became so angry that he threw a chair at us. I learned the hard way that action without the participation of those involved is destined to fail. It's a lesson many of us still need to learn. How we talk to one another, how we listen, how we relate, may be the most important thing of all. If we do not get that right, our noble intentions will not work. It comes back to whether we choose to walk through or walk in.
Wow. I can see why you would say, this is so right and right for leadership today. I mean, this is just perfect. Thank you so much, Megan.
Sure. And one of the interesting things about this is Peter wrote this, and in the bio, he didn't have about the chair throwing. He had that in his bio, and we thought, wow, what was that about? And so it led his story in a different direction that I think is even stronger than what he originally started with. But I think for me that choosing to walk through or walk in, combined with Adrienne Rich's calling to not talk about I, but we and you, just speaks to me so strongly right now.
Yes, indeed. And I really want to thank you for including these two pages together. Again, for our listeners, you don't see the book, but I want you to visualize it. And so the poem is on one page on the right-hand side, and then on the other side is this essay. And so every single 2 pages in the book or the spread has a poem and then a commentary from a leader. As you were reading it, Megan, my heart was drawn to many things, but my ear was drawn to how we talk to one another, how we listen, which recalls Stafford for me, how we listen to one another, how we relate may be the most important thing of all. So thank you so much for sharing that, and I'm just thrilled again that you're here, that you're talking about this wonderful book, Leading from Within, Poetry that Sustains the Courage to Lead. And we have about 5 or 6 more minutes, and I want to make sure that we get to some other areas of your work. But before we transition from Leading from Within, I'm wondering if you could say just a few words about how Leading from Within shows up in your own life and work. Great nuggets of wisdom. Thank you so much, Megan, for being my guest. This was part one of a two-part show. If you'd like to learn more about Megan's work, I know she'd be delighted to hear from you. You can connect with her on her website called teachingheartfirepoetry.com. That's all together, smushed together like one word, teachingheartfirepoetry.com. That's teachingheartfirepoetry.com, teachingheartfirepoetry.com. All right, so join me next week for part two of our show, when we'll hear more from my special guest, Megan Scribner. Please be here as she shares more about her amazing work serving leaders through the book she co-edited with Sam Intrater, a little gem of a book called Leading from Within, Poetry that Sustains the Courage to Lead. We could all use a little bit more courage these days, that's for sure. And as I just mentioned, part two of this show, Leading from Within, will air next week, right here on Talk Network Radio. Poet David White reminds us that poetry is the art of speaking and listening at the same time. In fact, I think that one of the most beautiful things about poetry is not the poem itself, it is the process. For poetry, like music making or any other art making, is all about the art of discovery. White also reminds us that the writing of poetry is the very frontier of which poets learn about themselves and their world simultaneously. The very frontier at which poets learn about themselves and their world simultaneously. You know, I think the same thing could be said about leaders. The art of leading is also the very frontier, the very edge, the cusp, the threshold at which leaders learn about themselves and their world simultaneously. Again, I want to give a shout out to my guest, Megan Scribner, for being on my show this week for part one, and for joining us next week for part two of this show. If you'd like to learn more about her work, connect with her on her website, and it's called teachingheartfirepoetry.com. Now, if you missed last week's show or any part of this week's broadcast, you can listen to the recording at your convenience. You can even listen to it on the go, right? You can check it out at www.talknetworkradio.com/legacy living. That's www.talknetworkradio.com/legacy living. And legacy living is one word smushed together, LEGACYLIVING. Now, before I close today, I want to thank each of you for tuning in to today's show, for allowing me to share a bit about my journey with what legacy living is all about. Not just about living and learning, but living and learning and serving, so that you make a difference in your own life and in the lives of others. It's about being on purpose, about being intentional every single day, 365, 24/7. Legacy living is one of the many ways to make your life count. Now, before I close today's show, I want to thank you for joining me here today. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Burgess, and this has been Legacy Living, Make Your Life Count. Please join me again next week, right here on Talk Network Radio for another show of Legacy Living. We're here again next Wednesday, 10 a.m., right here, Talk Network Radio. Don't just count the days in your life. Make the days in your life count. That's what legacy living is all about. Have a fantastic day, and remember, make the days of your life count. God bless. That's our show today. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Burgess. I hope you'll join me again next week. Until then, don't just count the days in your life. Make the days in your life count. That's what legacy living is all about. Here's to you. Have a fantastic day. Be sure to make it a yes kind of day. And remember, celebrate. Celebrate the music of your life. Make the days in your life count.